Good afternoon. My name is Ben Ramseth, and I'm an instructor with Educational Services in Charlotte, North Carolina. And with me today is Mike Hatfield, who is a technical analyst with the Support Services Department here in Redlands, California. We want to welcome you all to today's live training seminar. Today's live training seminar will be on publishing KML services with ArcGIS Server 9.3. So this seminar is going to be made up of 3 different topics, and each of these topics is going to be followed by a software demonstration, a review, and then a question and answer session. The first topic is going to be authoring resources for KML-enabled services, and the second one will be publishing KML-enabled services, and then the third one will be using KML-enabled services. So lots of talk on KML. You might notice that this is kind of you see these are basically 3 steps that for those of you that work with ArcGIS Server already are familiar with: author, publishing, and using. So it's kind of the mantra or the 3-step process that we use when we use ArcGIS Server. So that stands true for KML-enabled services also. So the first topic is authoring resources for KML-enabled services. So the first question that's probably rolling around your head out there is, what is KML? For those of you that are not familiar with it, it's a Keyhole Markup Language, and it's actually an XML specification for describing geographic features. And this can be vector features, raster features, it can be 2D or 3D. You can draw points, lines, and polygons, but also you can include words, pictures, movies if you want. So there's a lot of additional things you can add in, as long as your KML client supports it. So it's similar. ESRI has its data structures. This is a data structure that actually is the native format for Google Earth. So it involves some interoperability where we can take the ArcGIS server services that might be serving out certain GIS resources, certain data that ESRI produces, and we can serve it out into a format that another KML client, for example, like Google Earth, can view it. So ArcGIS Server at the 9.2 version supports KML 2.0. And at the 9.3 version, it supports KML 2.1. So the KML enabled service that you're going to put out there is at 9.2, it's going to be 2.0, and at 9.3, it's going to be 2.1. So if your KML client that you're using supports that type of KML, you'll be able to read our KML that we're putting out there in your client. So when you're authoring resources for a KML-enabled map service, you can include a lot of things in your map. It's very similar to what you would see with general or the map services that you might already be creating with ArcGIS Server. There's not a lot of difference. There's a couple things that'll come up that are slightly different with KML-enabled services, but most of the things are very similar to a regular map service. For example, you can put vector data in there. So points, lines, and polygons. You can also place in raster data. So you might have some aerial photography, or you have a digital elevation model or some type of service. These are all things that are supported in a service that's a KML-enabled service. And in addition to that, you can put 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional data. You can see on the slide here, we have a shot of ArcGlobe. And ArcGlobe is an ArcGIS desktop application. And here we're extruding features by a certain attribute value. So this is something that you can serve out and you could view in a KML client. So you can view this 3D data or the extruded features. Also, you can include labels. We don't have any labels on this screenshot, but you could set up labels. There's a couple ways that those will view in your KML client, and we can chat about that later. Also, our KML description and KML snippet. These are 2 things that are specific for a KML-enabled service. So it's something that will show up in the KML client when you're viewing the KML-enabled service that you create. And then there's a legend. The legend is just the page layout legend that you can add in. It is also supported in the KML-enabled service that you have as an output. So there's some general steps that you need to follow if you're going to create a resource to web enable it as a KML-enabled map service. So the first step would be to work with ArcGlobe if you're working with three-dimensional data. You could also open up ArcScene. ArcScene is another ArcGIS desktop product that does do three-dimensional rendering. But let's say where you're going to use ArcGlobe, you would just add in your feature classes. And then in the layer properties, you start setting some of the properties like symbology. The big one, if you're going to extrude your features and work with three-dimensional data, would be to set in a Globe Extrusion. Once you have the Globe Extrusion set and you have all your other layer properties dialed in the way you want them, you can save your layer file. And the reason we're going to save a layer file is we're not interested in the ArcGlobe document. We're not interested in a 3DD file, and that's what the ArcGlobe document is called. If we saved out a 3DD file, which we could do, and then we went into our catalog and published that service or that our globe document, it would create a globe service. And that's another way that you can display data, but you don't really have the interoperability with the globe service. It's something that's specific for ArcGIS Explorer. Why with the KML enabled map service, you can view it in ArcGIS Explorer, or you could potentially view it in Google Earth or any other client that would support KML. So we save a layer file because we want to make a KML enabled map service. And if you are working with 3D data, you do the general steps that I just spoke about, and then you can put your data, that layer file that you saved out, into ArcMap and then work from there and potentially add some more two-dimensional layers. If you're not doing any 3D data, you can skip the first part in ArcGlobe and just start right in ArcMap. When you're in ArcMap, you'll add the layer file in. You then set the properties, so symbologies, labels. You can actually set a transparency, or the KML snippet or description. And we'll talk about these two KML features in the upcoming slides where we have some more detail on them. And then once you're done, you create a legend in the page layout view if you want to. Actually, a lot of these layer properties are optional. They'll make your service that you're creating a little bit nicer looking or a little bit more attractive or more professional, but it's up to you which ones you actually want to implement. So the KML snippet is something you might not be familiar with. It's actually some information coming from the attribute table. So it's a title, a short piece of text that might be saved in your attribute table. And it shows up. You can see we have a screenshot here in Google Earth. You can see that the KML snippet is in the gray, the text. It's a population for the cities. And then if you look at on the right, you'll see the screenshot there showing you the Fields tab in the layer properties. And the layer properties we've chosen the name field here, and we just typed in the word KML snippet. It has to be all one word for the alias for that name field. Since we've done that, that turns into the KML snippet field, and that's what gets exposed to the client once you publish this service. Now, there's another KML description that's shown in the dark blue. So in this case, it's the name of the cities that we have. It looks like they're coming from Hawaii. The KML description gives you some more information. It can potentially be more than just what you see in the snippet. You can see it was quite short in the last screenshot, but it can be actually a lot of textual information. And that being said, I should mention that you want to avoid long and complex descriptions because it can slow down your performance in your KML clients. Now, there's no rule of thumb that's saying, okay, after a certain number of characters, you got to cut it out because it's going to slow things down. No, there's no set. It all depends on what you're doing, and if you see a degraded performance in your KML client, maybe it's something that you can change and see how the performance is after you change it. One option is to, instead of having all kinds of information in the description, you could go ahead and link to a web page, like have a link that goes into a web page as an alternative method to do the KML description, or another option instead of the KML description. So there's three types of descriptions. As a service as a whole, when you create the service, so we're talking about creating a resource now. The next section we'll talk about publishing a resource. So when you publish it, one of the steps is to create a network link file, which is kind of a shortcut to get to your KML enabled service. So you can set a description when you do that publishing and creating that network link. And then also you can set when you're doing the authoring, you can set it at the data frame level. So in the description box for the data frame properties, you can set a KML description there. And then also you can set it at the layer properties level. Now, in the layer properties level, this functionality is not actually available in ArcGIS Server 9.3 beta. However, it will be available at the final release of the software. For those of you that are working with the 9.3 beta right now, just note out there, or FYI, to state that it won't be available. So if you try to do it, you'll have some problems with it, but it will be implemented by the time we release final. So that brings us to the software demonstration. So in this software demonstration, I'm going to go in and I'm going to open up ArcGlobe because we're going to do some three-dimensional data work. So we want to really create some three-dimensional data, so we're going to do that by clicking the Add Data button, and we're going to add this feature class called Buildings. Once we add that in, we're just going to keep all the default settings on the wizard, and you'll see that it doesn't show up right away. The problem here is not a big problem. It's just that the image layer is sitting on top of our vector buildings layer. So we need to move it down, or we'll try that again. There we go. We move it down, and now you can see the buildings will show up. Now there's this really kind of mundane, kind of bluish, purple, gray color on the screen, so we probably want to do some changing and work with the symbology with these buildings and maybe extrude them so they pop up, so they look a little better, and we can get a better feel of how things are put together in the campus. So this is actually the Oregon State University campus, so it's some data coming from up there in the northwest. So if we right-click, we can go down to Properties, and in the Properties area, we can go to Categories, and under Categories, we can click on, or click off the symbol here for all other values, and then add all the values in from the Sector ID field. The reason we're doing this is a field that gives us more information about the buildings, kind of in the zone that they're in the campus. And then in addition to that, we want to hit a globe extrusion, and we're just going to put in 100 meters to keep things real simple. Another option would be to click on this button right here and build an expression. So if we wanted to build an expression that said we had maybe an attribute column that had all our 10 feet for each story. So if it's an 8-story building, it might be 80 feet tall. We can get a better representation of our different buildings, and that is supported with the software, and is usually the option that folks go with. But for this demo, we're just going to use 100 as a default. So you can see it looks pretty good here now. We've got some extrusions of our buildings, and I'm just going to back up just a little bit because we're a little close, so you can kind of see the whole campus. It might not be the best. Trying to zoom out, you might see it a little pixelated in streaming it out to the web here, but I wanted to show you a little better look and feel of the campus. So we've extruded our buildings, we've made some colors, or changed the symbology. Now what we're going to do is we're going to save a layer file. Now we're not like I said before, we're not interested in saving the ArcGlobe document, because the globe document, a 3DD file, if we saved it that way, we would be creating a globe service. And in this case, we want to save a layer file out because we're interested in working with a KML-enabled map service. So we're going to end up adding this layer into ArcMap and then work with this layer and other layers further, and then eventually save out a map document so we can create a map service, or a KML-enabled map service. So for now, we're done with our ArcGIS, or the ArcGlobe, which is a application that comes with ArcGIS Desktop. So we're going to go now into ArcMap, and in ArcMap, we're going to open up and add our three-dimensional file that we created, our buildings under our KML, and then we're going to add parking lots, paved streets, and water. Now these are all layer files that I've already created just to save time. And now you can see the data. It's not three-dimensional right here, and we can't tilt the Earth because we're not in ArcGlobe. So, which is fine. It's just that ArcMap does not support three-dimensional rendering. But the three-dimensional information is still there and stored within the layer file that we saved, and the buildings layer file. So now what I can do is I can set any additional properties I want to work with in ArcMap. So I could right-click on the buildings, and I can go down to Properties. And once I'm in Properties, I can go to the Fields tab, and I can set up the snippet. So we're going to take the building name, the building full name here, and we're going to make that the KML snippet. So type that in. There we go. And now we have a KML snippet field, or we have some information coming from that building. Oh, we actually, building full field, so the full names of the buildings. So in addition to that, we could set up labels if we wanted to. We could also set up any of these properties. We could set up in display, we could set up a set up percent transparency if we wanted to see through our buildings. And we also can go to the General tab, and even though this is not supported or not available yet at the beta release of ArcGIS Server 9.3, at final, you'll have the ability to type in here and say, you know, the layer level for the layer description. So you'll see that this will be blank when we go in and look at this later in topic 3, but let's change that so it says the word layer. There we go. But eventually, like I said, at the final version, you'll be able to type things in here, and they will show up when you look at the resulting service that you create. So I'm going to close the properties down now, and I'm going to set a KML description that it does exist right now and is a feature of the software, and it is the data frame properties level for a KML description. So I'm going to say data frame level, and then we'll just ... meaning we probably put more information in there if we're actually going to do this, you know, in our working with our own data. So then we're going to click OK. So now we've added a data frame KML description, and we're really ready to go ahead and save the map document because we're creating a map service, a KML-enabled map service. We need to save this map document so we have something to publish. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to do a save as, and then I'm going to name it OSU for Oregon State University, and then just put KML behind it so we can keep it separate so we know which one it is. Then we'll click save, and then we're ready to minimize ArcMap because we're done with the ArcMap software, and we're actually going to go now into the review session. So what have we talked about? Well, we talked about what KML is. KML stands for Keyhole Markup Language, and it is a XML specification. And it's a way to store points, lines, and polygons in addition to, you know, pictures and movies and other things that you might or that might be supported by a KML client. It is the native format for Google Earth, so it does give us some interoperability with ArcGIS Server and other software products out there. And as far as authoring resources for KML, it's a very straightforward process, very similar to what you might do in other map services if you're familiar with working with map services in ArcGIS Server or creating them. So you author a resource, and you work with the ArcGIS desktop products to create that resource. You can work with three-dimensional data in ArcGlobe or ArcScene, and then you can take those layer files, put them into ArcMap, and then work with them in the 2D environment, you know, to set up properties. Or if you're just working with two-dimensional data, you just throw that directly into ArcMap and work with it. And some of the additional properties that are in there are a KML snippet or a KML descriptions. And there's different levels that you can work with the KML descriptions at, whether it's the service level, the data frame level, or the layer properties level. So at this point, I think it's time to turn it over to Mike here, and he's going to answer some of the questions that you've been sending in.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, one question from Francisco from Ascension asks, may I get audit information from KML through ArcGIS Server? And by that you mean maybe author a creation date, creation time, or more information about the ArcGIS Server. The answer is yes and no. There is some available information, and we haven't got there in the presentation yet, but there is a web-based tool called Services Explorer that we'll be showing you that does give you some information about your map services that have been published and KML enabled, but information such as create time and date and other things that you might use for auditing will not come through in the KML specification. Another question from Joseph in Albuquerque. Some KML services are updated when the KML file is updated. Does ArcGlobe do that as well? Well, Joseph, basically what you'd normally want to do is you'd want to make those changes to your underlying data in ArcMap or ArcGlobe. Now, once you've made those changes, if you restart the KML-enabled service, that change to your data will be automatically available to anyone accessing the service from a KML client. There's nothing you need to do on the client side. But changes made directly to, say, a custom KML document won't go back and make changes to your underlying ArcMap or ArcMap document. Okay, another question from Axel in Brooksville. Do KML services take advantage of map caches? And the answer is yes. At 9.3, through the use of KML regions, cached map services can be displayed via KML. And for now, the last question we can get to is from Brian in Portland. If my map uses labels, do they convert to KML too? And the answer is yes. In general, you can include both vector or raster layers in your map. Labels that you set with either of these feature types will be included in the KML. And once you publish that service, you'll be able to choose whether the labels in your map are rasterized and lie flat on the globe, or whether they're represented as vectors. And therefore, labels represented as vectors will actually stand up on the globe and rotate when you rotate the map. These are known as billboarded labels. So we'll get to more of your questions after the next section. For now, I'll hand it back to Ben.
Thanks, Mike. So the next section that we're going to work on is publishing KML-enabled services. So we've worked hard now to create a resource. We've done some work in ArcGlobe, ArcMap. We've got a resource that we want to enable via the web. So the next step would be to go ahead and publish that resource and create a KML-enabled service from it. So it's really very similar to what you would do with a regular map service. So just like the authoring step, doing the publishing, pretty straightforward. What you're going to do is you're going to either publish it in ArcCatalog or ArcGIS Server Manager. Sometimes people ask me in my classes, which is the best way to what application do you suggest I use to do my publishing? You can use either one. And the answer is, well, exactly, you can use either one. It's really up to you. If you're a GIS person that's more familiar with ArcCatalog, well, great. Maybe you want to use ArcCatalog. If you're a person that's more familiar with a web application and you do not know the ArcGIS desktop applications, we'll go ahead and work with Server Manager and use the web application. Plus, with ArcGIS Server Manager, you can kind of administer the server remotely, so you don't necessarily need to be on any of your actual ArcGIS server machines. So the KML capability is really the thing that makes a map service be a KML-enabled map service. And it's a capability that is not checked on by default at 9.2. So you need to check on that checkbox for the KML capability. You'll see if you publish a service, it is turned off. So when you do the publishing, you just need to check on the box. And then you can set some additional properties that we'll talk about in just a second. And then at 8.9.3, the users or the ESRI developers have decided to change it so it's checked on by default. It was in response to folks out there saying that KML is really important to them and they'd like it checked on by default. However that came about, it is currently the default to have it checked on. You can, however, turn it off if you want to. It is not something that you need to serve out all your map services with the KML capability. You can turn that off if you'd like. And then as far as the KML properties go, once you get to that dialog pane when you're publishing your service, you can click on the KML capability, whether it's checked on already or not checked on. If you click on KML, you'll see there's a bunch of properties that pop up. And it's the operations that are allowed are the first things you'll see. You can allow single images, separate images, or vector data. I find that the vectors work really good for extruded features if you're working in the 3D environment. And then there's also a couple other output options that I'll show you when we get into the demo. So KML through REST. So REST stands for Representational State Transfer. And it's not something that's specific to ESRI. It's not something that's specific to GIS. It is a way that services or web content can be accessed. So it exposes services through navigable URLs. And these URLs are just the URL pointing to where that service is being exposed through what we call REST. And we have a way of accessing these services with REST through ArcGIS Server. It is something that's new at ArcGIS Server 9.3. All our map services and our image services have all the map and image services in our ArcGIS Server are exposed through REST by default. And you can discover these URLs if you want through something called Services Explorer. And in the third demo, we'll get in and I'll show you Services Explorer, because for a lot of you, this is something that's brand new and you haven't heard of Services Explorer because it's something that came out with 9.3. It is an application for navigating those REST endpoints, or the way to access those services. So we have these URLs that you can navigate that point to a KMZ file. And a KMZ file is actually really what a network link is made up of. And the KMZ file at this point, let's just call it a shortcut. Ability to go in and access your KML-enabled service in a certain client. Now, in addition to that, another thing that Services Explorer has is the ability to click on a link and open up a certain endpoint or a certain URL that's pointing to a KMZ file, or what it really is a certain KML-enabled service. You can kind of automatically open it up in a KML client of your choice. And you'll see in Services Explorer, you have the option to open it up in the Google Earth program or our ArcGIS Explorer program. So the network link file, more information about that, it is a way of viewing dynamic KML content on the web. So really what it boils down to is it's a URL to launch a KML client and to display that KML service. So when you create a network link, what you're doing is creating what we call a KMZ file. That KMZ file is a zipped up KML file, and it acts like a shortcut. So it's a shortcut to your client and your KML service that you're going to work with. Now within ArcGIS Server, these KML, ArcGIS Server will serve out KML-enabled services. And there's kind of three ways that you can work with that network link. Now, you can create your own network link. So if you want to create that KMZ file, you can create it through ArcGIS Server Manager. And that was available at 9.2 or is available at 9.2. And then also available at 9.3. Services Explorer also has an option to set up a KML-enabled, or take your KML-enabled service and create a network link for it. And then in addition to that, you also have a default network link that gets created automatically through REST at 9.3. Now, so all map services and map and image services will automatically have that network link available. So in addition to that, you can also return your results as KML through what we call REST at 9.3. So through that REST, you can either query geodatabases and return them into KML so you can view them in a KML client, or work with geoprocessing. So that means working with a geodata service or potentially a geoprocessing service. So there's three ways that you can create a network link file. So you can either create that or keep that default or use that default network link. The only disadvantage of this is the one that gets created through that REST endpoint is that you got to keep the default properties. So you can't change any of the properties. Now, if you want to generate one through Services Explorer, you can configure those properties, other than what the defaults are. So you can set up your own properties. Also, it makes things available at the following address, which is http:// web server name, and then ArcGIS REST and services. So that's where that network link is exposed, or where it's stored. If you're working with Server Manager, you're working with things a little differently, and you could still configure the properties of your network link, but you're exposing it now through the http:// the name of your web server, ArcGIS and KML. So it's a different location where that network link gets stored. So that brings us to the software demonstration. So at this point, I'm going to go into Arc Catalog. Now, I could also use Server Manager to do what I'm about to do, but I'm going to use this to publish my resource that I've created. So I have a map document. Let's refresh it to see our map document here. So I have a map document that I could right-click I could go to Publish to ArcGIS Server. Now this would work. However, it will keep all the default properties for my new KML enabled service. So I don't want to do that. With a KML enabled service, it's usually a good idea to go down here and right click on the server itself and go to Add New Service. And this is an option that allows you to really kind of manually set things so you don't have to keep the default properties. So I'm going to call this one OSU, and we're going to call it KML. And then we can put in our service level description. So we can type in, let's just type in service level and ... meaning we probably have more information there. And then we can go next. We choose a map document. So we're going to choose the one we just created. Click open. And then we can click next. And then here's kind of the important page here where we've got the KML option. You notice that it's checked down by default. I could turn it off if I want. In this case, I want it on because I want to make a KML-enabled map service. I can then click on or click off any operations I don't want to allow. In this case, since I'm doing Globe Extrusion, I'm just going to leave it to vectors. And then I have my output options. So I have some options here to work with different output. For this small data set I'm working with, I'm not going to worry with that. Also, you can change some of the network link properties down here on the bottom. So I'm just going to click next and then keep all these other defaults that are just kind of for general service issues. And then we're going to click finish, starting the service right away. If you don't want to start the service, you can always click no and then choose to manually start it later. So now that the service is started, I can click on it and click the preview, and it's going to show up. It's going to look very similar to what you see in ArcMap. Notice that 3 dimensions are not being shown on the screen. There's no extrusion for our buildings. However, that's fine because that layer file is where that extrusion is stored, and that layer file, of course, since we're working with a map document here, is stored like in the map document. So that information is still there, and it's in this virtual representation of our map document, which is called the service we have here, or this map service. But we will not see the 3 dimensions until we open up our KML-enabled map service in a KML client. So that being said, we're going to minimize our catalog here, and we're going to go into our Server Manager, which should be right here. There it is. I need to log into Server Manager. The way that the ArcGIS Server is set up is that there's a group called ArcGIS Admin, and anybody that you want to let administer the server needs to be in the ArcGIS Admin group. In this case, I have a login called LTS that is in the ArcGIS Admin group. So that means I can log into Server Manager. Once I log into Server Manager, I'll be able to use all the features that are in here. Now, since we're streaming, we have a limited screen real estate, and so some of the stuff is going to be cut off a little bit for you. I'm going to click on the Services tab here in the left-hand side. Now notice this is the 9.3 interface for Server Manager, so it might be a little different than what you're used to if you were using the 9.2 software. But what we're doing here, the functionality is exactly the same as it is at 9.2, even though we're using the 9.3 software. So the creating of the network link in Server Manager works the same way. So we can manage our services, and here's our services that are running. We can start and stop our services here, edit any properties we want. So if we want to edit some of the KML properties, I can click on the edit button right here and open them up. But at this point, that's not what I'm interested in doing. What I'm interested in doing is click on the application link and click on the KML network links link on the side there, and then choose this create network link. So this is going to pull up the dialog to create a new network link. Notice that it's kind of cut off on the side here, also due to that we're streaming out via the web, so we're not going to be able to see everything. But I'm just going to type in here KML, and then I'm going to type in the word short because it's a short description. And then I'm going to type in long for the long description, so we kind of know where things are coming from when we see this in the KML client. I'm going to click next, and then I'm going to go down and click the type of service or the service that I want to use. Notice that we have 2 options here because there's 2 services that we're running on our ArcGIS server. If you have a production server, you might have many services running. So you want to make sure you pick the right one. And at 9.3, all of them are going to be KML enabled. So you can see this, all of them will be a KML enabled map service. So unless you've turned off that option. So make sure you choose the right one. That's a common mistake that people make. And then you choose the vector layers as vectors and vector layers as vectors and raster layers as images. And then once you're done with that, you can go ahead and click finish because we're going to leave all the other properties as a default. So we click finish, and then we have a network link. You can see it's located at this location. I could click on this right now and open it up in a KML client, but I'm not interested in doing that at this point. What I'm interested in doing is waiting until we get to the third section to show off the KML clients and how you work with these network link files. So at this point, I'm just going to stop here. We have the network link file created. It's saved on our server, so we can access it later. We can also work with the properties and change anything we want here in our network link file. So that being said, I'm going to minimize this, and we're going to go into the review. So just to recap what we talked about in the second section, dealing with publishing, KML-enabled services. So the process is very similar to what you do with a non-KML-enabled map service. So you can do it in ArcCatalog or ArcMap. You do the publishing. It's up to you, depending on which application you're more comfortable with. And then as far as KML through REST goes, we have this new REST that allows us to access our services through these URLs that we can navigate. And in order to access these KML-enabled services, we also need to make a network link. And there's multiple ways of creating a network link. So we can either keep the default that is exposed through REST. We could create our own through Services Explorer that will also be served out through REST. Or we can create one through Server Manager, which will actually behind the scenes it serves it out through the SOAP web service endpoint. So, and it's stored in a slightly different location as we talked about in that previous slide during the second topic. So that being said, I think it's time to turn it back over to Mike, and he has some more questions that he wants to talk about or answer. And thanks for getting those questions in, and keep them coming because we'll answer as many as we can. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Mike.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, Richard in Sonora asks, how can you convert raster images to KML? Well, Richard, there's a specific geoprocessing tool you might want to take a look at called raster to KML, or I'm sorry, called layer to KML. And there's some specific information about the usage of that tool available through our online help system. Naven in Colombia asks another question, can ArcIMS serve KML-enabled services? And unfortunately, the answer is no. ArcIMS does have the ability to display map services based on Axel files or MXD documents, but does not have the ability to KML enable those services. Brandon in Cookville asks, when you upgrade from ArcGIS Server 9.2 to 9.3, how can I ensure that my map services are going to be saved? And the answer to that is, that's an automatic process. When you upgrade or uninstall any version of 9.2 server, those map services that you've previously created will stay on your server. There's a configuration file for each of those services that resides within an installation directory that does not get removed when you uninstall or upgrade. And the last question that we answer for now is from Michael in Ohio. If I have a hyperlink property enabled as a layer property, is that utilized in the KML? And the answer is basically yes. KML can be used to display and work with georeferenced HTML. And so this basically allows GIS users to publish rich content about their geographic features through the formatted web pages and hyperlink capabilities provided by HTML. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can at the end, but we'll hand it back to Ben now for the last section.
Thanks, Mike. The last section we want to talk about is using KML-enabled services. So we've done a lot of work up to this point. We've created a resource. We've served that resource or published that resource out as a KML-enabled map service. We've set some properties. We're ready to get in and use this thing. So we want to take a look at what it looks like in a KML client, and also how to work with the Services Explorer. So in this section, the first thing we'll talk about is the Services Explorer, which is an application that explores your services through REST. And remember, REST is new at 9.3, so Services Explorer is also something that's new at 9.3. Now, there's two ways to access Services Explorer. You can either access it through the Start menu, or you can open up a browser of your choice and type in the http:// web server name ArcGIS REST and services. And that will, you'll be able to access any of the services that are exposed through REST. Now, really, through the Start menu, what it's doing is just opening up a browser and pasting in that path name for you. But either way, you're getting the same Services Explorer, and it will allow you to take a look at those services that are exposed through REST. And then it will find all the URLs for those services. And this, of course, includes the KML-enabled services. And then also, you have some links in there. And these links allow you to open a service as KML-enabled. So you can use either Google Earth or ArcGIS Explorer. Those are the two links that are available for KML-enabled services. So we've got also the ability to do some interoperability between ArcGIS and KML clients, because KML is something that's produced by Google Earth or by Google, and because Keyhole Markup Language isn't something that their data format. So Google Earth is one of the clients that you would use to consume that KML-enabled service. And it is a free and downloadable application. It's used to visualize data, so it has a fairly simple interface. In your organization, maybe folks already use Google Earth, so it might be nice to expose your services as KML-enabled services so folks can view them in Google Earth because that's what they're comfortable with. Another option would be to use the ArcGIS Explorer, which is also a free downloadable application that allows you to visualize data. It displays data from ESRI servers. It also it displays data from your ArcGIS server if you want it to. And there's a kind of an additional functionality that you can do kind of above and beyond what Google Earth does. KML-enabled services is one thing you can explore in ArcGIS Explorer, but you can also throw in regular map services that are not KML-enabled. You can add geoprocessing tasks as a geoprocessing service. You can add in a custom task. There's a software development kit or an SDK that you can download from, through ESRI.com. You can search for it and download it and use it to create a task, like one that would, one example of one of the samples is a task that creates points, lines, and polygons on the screen as graphics. So if you want to add some graphics to your ArcGIS Explorer, you could do that. In addition, we have some default tasks that you can kind of see in the screenshot here, showing you that you can do like driving directions or a find place task. We'll take a look at these a little bit more when we get into the demo. And that's the next thing that we're going to do, is we're going to jump into the demo here. So what I need to do first is open up the Services Explorer. So here's Services Explorer. So what it looks like, you can see that it is accessing this location. The name of my server, ArcGIS REST and Services. I could go right in and explore my footprints in Google Earth if I wanted to. I could also go in and click on any services I have running. In this case, I have a map service. You can see that that because it says map server right here. I click on it, and it's going to open up my information about that service. So I have the potential to view this map service in ArcMap or also through the ArcGIS JavaScript. And that's a simple HTML application that allows you to take a look at this map service in a very simple application that's been kind of created for you on the fly. And this is something that's new at 9.3, and there's a lot of good information about the JavaScript application that you can create a JavaScript application. That information is in the 9.3 help. Now, the other two that are just pertinent to a KML-enabled map service would be ArcGIS Explorer and Google Earth. So you can click on this link and you can open up your KML-enabled map service right into those applications. And then also you can view the footprint of this individual map service if you want. And here you see the description at the service level. So we're seeing that's included right here. You're getting the data frame name. And then also here's our layers. So we can click on any of these layers. We can click on parking lots, and it will tell us what type of the type of layer it is. In this case, it's a feature layer. What our geometry type is. This would be the KML description per layer, and you can see that's currently not a feature function right now, so it'll be added in for the final release, but it would show up right here if it was coming up. And then we have the min scale, the max scale. the extent, and then also information about our different fields. In addition to that, we can also do some querying of the layers we have in our map. In this case, we'll just be querying the, the parking lots layer. So we can back up here and go back in. Here's the description coming from the data frame level. That's exposed right here. And we also have the spatial reference, also stating if this is a cached map service. So you can see that it says false. And then we have our initial extent and our full extent. In addition to that, we have our ESRI decimal degrees, telling what units we're in. And then also we have the title and the author, the person that created this map document. So under here, we've also shows the supported interfaces. We have REST, or we do have SOAP. SOAP being what was available at 9.2, and then at 9.3, we both have REST and SOAP available. And here's the operations that you can perform on this service. You could, through Services Explorer, you could export a map, do an identify, do a find, or what we're interested here is generating a KML. So this is how you create a network link file through REST using the ArcGIS Services Explorer. So in this case, we're going to type in Oregon State University, and we're going to say KML. And we're going to choose streets, water, buildings, and parking lots. And we're going to say we want the vector layers as vectors and raster layers as images. And then we generate the KML. And that's going to create a file, a KMZ file. We could choose to open it up in a KML client, or we could save it. In this case, I'm going to save it, and I'm going to type in Services Explorer so we know that where it's coming from. So we know that we created this network link through Services Explorer, and then we're going to click Save. So now it's going to ask if you want to open it up. Once it's saved, I'm going to say no, because I want to open up a different network link directly in either Google Earth or ArcGIS Explorer. So I'm going to click Close, and then I'm going to minimize Services Explorer, and we're going to go into our KML clients now. So the first KML client is going to be Google Earth. So I'm zoomed in already to Oregon State University. You can see the campus down there, or the buildings in the image. I'm going to add in my KML service. There it is. Once I've added it in, it's going to take a little, I have to click on the box to check it on, and then it's going to take a little bit, and it will pop up. You can see here's our long description. So there's our long description that we have. And there's our data. So you can see all our extruded buildings. You can see the stadium and all other buildings on campus having a little color to them. In Google Earth, there's lots of different features that are available. For example, here I could go in and click on one of these, and I could see an image coming from that area. Here's the Die Hard fan wall, I guess, in Oregon State University. So it's just an image that pops up. So, you know, there's a bunch of them here. You can go check out all the different buildings. And here's the main Oregon State University. It's in purple, so it's a little different. And we also have an orange one here that has something else. I think it's for their football team. So anyway, lots of things you can do. I would zoom around and show you more features of Google Earth, but Google Earth or ArcGIS Explorer or ArcGlobe, they're very resource intensive as far as trying to send them out via stream in the internet. So when we're in this presentation mode, it's really hard to show it off, otherwise it starts to pixelate. So at this point, there's the navigation wheel on the top here. I'm just going to minimize Google Earth. We're going to take a look at ArcGIS Explorer. So in ArcGIS Explorer, you can do a very similar thing. We can go through File and choose Open. We're going to open up our network link here, and it's going to add it in. You can see that we're already zoomed to the Oregon State University campus. Here's our parking lots coming up. Pretty soon we're going to pop up some roads and some streams, or the stream or river that's in the area, and then our buildings. So we get a similar look and feel. In here, there's a lot of things we can do with ArcGIS Explorer. We could put in links to different websites if we wanted to. If we had labels, we could have those billboard labels that pop up, and you kind of see it like it would be a billboard on the earth. We also have different tasks over here. We have the find place task, find address. You can do driving directions. What's the address here? Kind of a reverse geocode. Create some notes. Use the measure tool. So if I want to find out the distance from, if I click on this right here, I can measure from maybe this building down to this building over here. If I want to do a straight line distance, I can use this tool. There's another tool that you can click in and do multiple vertices. So as the crow flies, it's 1,365 feet, and I could change that to meters if I wanted to, or I could change it to miles. So you can do a number of things with the measure tool that comes out of the box. So we minimize that. And another thing we have access to is, like I said before, well, we do have a navigation, so we can tilt, or we can also zoom in and out. In addition to that, we could add in geoprocessing services as a task. So you could actually use some geoprocessing or some tools that you've created in your ArcGIS desktop applications. And also you can add your own custom task into ArcGIS Explorer. There's a software development kit or an SDK that's free and downloadable from the web. You can make your own custom tasks, like the ability to draw some points, lines, or polygons as graphics on top of your screen. So lots of options you can do with ArcGIS Explorer. At this point, I'm going to minimize ArcGIS Explorer, and we're going to go down into the web-based help. Because some of you like to know where the help topics are located and what's available. We have both the 9.2 and the 9.3 help available. First, I'm going to go into 9.2. I'm going to click on the online help, and I'm going to show you where some of the KML information is located. So if you go under publishing services, types of services, here's the KML topic. So here's all the 9.2 information we have about KML services. You'll see at 9.3 there's more information because we've added some more features at 9.3 for KML-enabled services. And here's a tutorial you can click on that goes into publishing a KML service and really walks through the steps, minus the couple things that we've done at 9.3, of what we've done in this live training seminar. So this tutorial is a great thing to walk through if you're working with ArcGIS Server 9.2 right now and you want to publish a KML-enabled service. So if you do have 9.3 installed, or in the future when you get 9.3 installed, when you migrate to 9.3, you can go in and take a look at the 9.3 help, or just to get an idea of what's coming out. There's also good information about the 9.2 features, but in addition to the 9.2, we also have, under types of services, we have a KML book that has a bunch of different pages in it. For example, we have the KML support in ArcGIS Server to give you an idea what's supported. Also, we have authoring maps for publishing a KML service. And then we also have a topic that deals with viewing services in KML. In addition to that, we have the same tutorial that explains how you can go through and work through the whole process that we've done in this live training seminar. You can see it talks about REST, it talks about network links. So a lot of good information in the help. They really added a lot at 9.3 as far as the KML-enabled map service goes. And they've also added a good number of features, some additional stuff that is very rich in functionality. So I'm going to minimize the help here, and I have one more location I want to go to, the ESRI server blog. Well, actually, blogs.esri.com. At blogs.esri.com, we have a couple blogs that might be of interest to you. One would be the ArcGIS Server Development blog. Lots of good information in here. It's not just developer information. There's lots of, using ArcGIS Server info in here. For example, if I type in help, you get the 10 must-read help topics. You can click on it, and it links you into a bunch of hyperlinks that will take you right into the help menu. So I can click on one of them, and the screen popped up there above everything. Let me move it down for you guys. So it just pops up and shows you, that help topic. So you can look at it and get an idea. These are really good help topics to check out. Now let's close that down, and then let's back up and go back to blogs.esri.com and show you one more blog that we want to look at, and that is the ArcGIS Explorer blog. So if this is the client you're going to use for KML, the ArcGIS Explorer the blog has a lot of good information and a lot of postings about working with ArcGIS Explorer. So lots of good information in here, lots of additional kind of neat functionality that you can add on to ArcGIS Explorer to make it kind of more dynamic and more user-friendly or more exciting for the users to use. So at that point, I'm going to minimize this, and we're going to go into the review. Just to recap, we've worked with Services Explorer in the demo. We've also talked about that it's available at 9.3 Shows you all your map and image services that are exposed through REST. That includes KML-enabled map services. In addition to that, you have some interoperability with ArcGIS Server and KML clients like Google Earth. Google Earth is the native, kind of the native format for KML. I mean, that's where KML came from. Also, you have ArcGIS Explorer, which is an application that allows you to go in, cruise around, and view data, or it's a data visualization. There's lots of additional things you can do with ArcGIS Explorer. It's coupled quite well with the ArcGIS Server software. So at this point, I'm going to stop and turn it over to Mike, and he's going to answer some more of your questions that have come in.
Thanks, Ben. All right, we've had a significant number of questions, so I'm going to talk a little faster and try to get to as many as I can. Hunter from Grand Junction asks, most of our organizational data is in state plane. Do we have to convert to lat long for KML? And the general answer is no, there shouldn't be a need to convert your data to be used by KML. Now, if you do plan to cache that data and make use of KML regions, there are some projection considerations that you'll want to look at, and there's some great information in the web help that Ben's already pointed us to. Robin from Fort Worth asks, is transparency from an MXD maintained when it's published as a KML service through ArcGIS Server? And the simple answer is yes, that transparency is a supported portion of the KML specification and therefore should be picked up by an ArcGIS Server KML service. Derek from Abu Dhabi asks, are there or will there be learning resources about REST on the ESRI website? And Derek, the answer is yes. There will be extensive information about REST available in the web help at 9.3. However, those customers that are currently part of our beta program can access that now, and the general public will be able to access that at the release of 9.3. Brian from Huntsville asks, can I publish the same KML services in ArcGIS Server 9.2 that you're discussing today? And in general, the answer is yes. However, there are some new features with KML at 9.3. So some of the things that we've talked about today, automatic availability of KML through REST, the use of KML regions to display cached map services, the availability of KML for image services, as well as map services, KML footprints through REST, the ability to turn off labels, and the ability to view a legend, which is part of your map service. Those are all things that you're only going to see at the 9.3 version of Server with KML. Tom from Arlington and Damon from Charlottesville have a very similar question about ArcGIS Server license level and what's necessary to publish a KML service. In general, you need either standard enterprise or standard work group at a minimum, but if anyone out there happens to have advanced enterprise or advanced work group, that will work as well. The only two license levels that will not work with KML are the basic standard and basic enterprise, which don't include visualization. Phil from San Antonio asks, can we publish ArcSDE layers and view the content dynamically via KML? And the answer is yes, Phil. As long as you're not using caching, any dynamic data changes that are made in your ArcSDE database will be visible to your end clients that are accessing via KML. David from Salt Lake City asks, my organization has maps with legends that are graphics. How do I create KML legends for those maps? In general, with 9.3, you can expose a legend via KML, but if you've converted that legend over to be graphics, that will not be used by KML. So for those of you out there that intend to use that feature, when you're authoring your map document, you'll want to consider that and not convert your legends over to graphics. Mary from Charlotte asks, are KML snippets similar to map tips? And the short answer is yes, that snippets and descriptions appear. Basically, when you click on a particular feature, an informational pop-up balloon will appear with the information part of the snippet. So it's very much like a map tip. And the final question that I can answer for now is from Michael in Idaho. Can I call the KML service for a particular map envelope? And the answer is yes. Programmatically, you could make a specific call to a KML-enabled service with a particular envelope. Just to try to squeeze in one last one that just came in, David from Redlands asks, how does KML handle labels? And in general, KML handles labels quite well. You can set labels on either vector or raster layers in your map, and they'll be included in your KML. And once again, if you choose to have your labels represented as vectors, then you can take advantage of these billboarded labels, which stand up and move when you're panning around the map. Okay, so to finish us off, thank you very much for your time, and I'll pass back to Ben.
Thanks, Mike. Before we go, I'd like to point you to a few resources. So on our For More Information slide here, we have a live train seminar that is now recorded, or what we call web training. It's What's New in ArcGIS Server at 9.2, something that was broadcast a while ago, but it's a good topic that goes over the features of ArcGIS Server 9.2, which is a lot of stuff that is still available at ArcGIS Server 9.3. So in addition to that, we also have currently an introduction to ArcGIS Server. This is currently at the 9.2 level. Good overview, 2 days of what ArcGIS Server is all about and what you can do with it. In addition to that, it is also will be updated for 9.3. So as soon as 9.3 comes out, it will include this new functionality that's available in ArcGIS Server version 9.3. And then we also have an ArcGIS Server web administration using the Microsoft.NET framework. And this is a class that is available at 9.3, or when 9.3 comes out, this class will be available. It's a 2-day class and goes over all the information on how to set up ArcGIS Server and apply security and to work with general and administration topics. In addition to that, we also have the website here for the ArcGIS Server Help Online. This is the 9.2 help. If you just put in 9.3 instead of 9.2, you'll get to the 9.3 help. In addition to that, we also have the ArcGIS Server blog. And with the server blog, that's one place you can go to get good server information. In addition to that, there's the ArcGIS Server, or the ArcGIS Explorer blog, which is available also at, off of blogs.esri.com. So your comments help us improve our seminars. Please take a moment to complete our survey. Just click the Give Us Feedback link to take the survey. We hope you've enjoyed today's seminar. On behalf of ESRI, I'd like to thank all of you for attending.